Hello, and welcome to the Science Fiction and Fantasy Marketing Podcast, the show where we help you establish your author brand, increase the size of your audience, and sell more books. I'm Lindsay Baroker, and I'm here with Jeffrey Poole and Joe Lalo. And we have a guest this week who's going to be talking to us about her experience with Amazon, one of Amazon's publishing imprints. And she's also written a book on self-editing and a book on plotting more quickly. Her title is better than how I just said it. Her name is Jacqueline Garlick. She's the author of the popular young adult steampunk fantasy series, The Illumination Paradox. Also, she's written the If Only books, a contemporary coming-of-age romantic mystery series, and the nonfiction books I mentioned that are for writers, TikTok Plot, How to Speed Write the Next Blockbuster ebook. I warned you that I can't read out loud, Jacqueline. And TikTok Edits, How to Edit Your Own Writing. And we'll be talking to her about her steampunk and also the editing and plotting and maybe getting some tips for writers here. Welcome to the show, Jacqueline.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into self-publishing?
Well, I came through, I'm a hybrid author, so I came through traditional publishing channels to begin with. I, like many people, have wanted to do this for many, many years. I think I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, and I was in class, and we'd have those terrible readers. I'm old enough to have those terrible readers with like stories, and you had the comp questions you had to answer in the little box and put them back in the little library things. And I hated them. I was bored. And so I would finish and then I would rewrite the stories to make them better. And my teachers would get annoyed that I was distracted always. Like, but the ending could be so much better when I was really little. But I had a few great teachers who encouraged me, including a high school teacher that was amazing. And so I always wanted to do that. My parents didn't think it was a feasible profession, and they sent me other directions. And then, so I didn't get to it till very late in life. And then when I did, I went the traditional way because you think that that's the way you should do it. And I didn't really know that much about self-pub yet. It was like 2008, 9-ish when I started. So I went off, oh darn, I went off, that's probably gonna ding like crazy. I went off to, I figured I better learn to write. So I went to some conferences with CBWI, which is Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. And there I met Ellen Hopkins. And I ended up in blind entry into her mentoring program, which is quite a great program. And I mentored with them for a year, one-on-one with authors. And Ellen is always floating around for help as well to understand the industry, and she's a wealth of knowledge. And at the end of that, I finished a book. That's the whole goal for that. And I finished a YA contemporary, and that got me my agent right away. And he was a big agent in the US for YA. And we had a great relationship. We were like really good friends and everything. And he just couldn't sell my work. He sold a lot of my friends' work for a lot of money. Really, really, really big deals. But it just ended up that I was always just in that near miss column. So when it happened, I started writing Lumiere, and I didn't tell them about it because I got tired of like, oh, they don't want contemporary now. They want, sci-fi. Oh, quick, write a dystopian. This is what they're after now. Oh, quick, do this, do this. And I mean, he wasn't really saying that, but you knew that as an author. This was what getting purchased, head this way, head that way, or whatever. And so I had written many things, and I got tired, so I just wrote Lumiere. And I didn't say anything, and I applied for Donald Moss from the Donald Moss Agency. He has a great big program through a great company called Free Expressions. And it's a week-long course to teach you to write. And he is a great teacher, and it's called the Breakout Novel Intensive. So I applied for that with the first 50 pages, and I won his scholarship. I was chosen for his scholarship, and he really loved my work and encouraged me. And so I thought, well, this is it. This is the one that's going to hit for sure. I mean, Don Moss loves it. So this is going to hit. And it didn't hit. It came out right when they closed borders. And so even though there was a lot of interest, the editors were all like, well, where do we put this? It's a sci-fi fantasy blend. That was the kiss of death. Never do that in trad. And so it all got sent back. And then my agent basically said, well, we're moving on, write another book. And I was like, 2 years of my life and we're moving on. So I was like, no, I'm not moving on. And he was like, well, why don't you just self-pub it then? And I was like, well, okay, I will. And so I did. And then I was out there almost a year, and it got picked up by an editor from Skyscape, Amazon, contacted me, and they bought the series from me. So they bought the first 2 books in the series. So that's kind of a roundabout way to end up kind of in trad, but not really. And then I loved self-pub, so I just kept doing my own thing. So I'd love, my theory now is to do a little bit of both, if possible.
Yeah, that sounds like I've heard that kind of a story like that from a lot of people. And I know myself, when I was first looking, I thought too I would have to traditional publish. It was like 2009, 2010. And they're like, we don't want any of that elves and dragons kind of fantasy, or, we don't want, so I had a science fantasy kind of romance thing. And they're like, oh no, don't send us that stuff. We want, I don't even remember what it was, paranormal romance or something like that at the time, or contemporary fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's tough when, and a lot of people feel like they're failing because like they don't understand their writing can be really good. And it's just if they don't have a slot for it, then that's
Yes.
the end of the story.
Yeah, I likened it to this. It's like they have like an hourglass and only so many grains of sand can get through. They can only purchase so many things in a year. So if you're lucky enough to be that one grain of sand that lands in that hourglass and gets through, and it's exactly what they need to tell their boss to get sales rolling again that year. Like, what is the new black this fall in writing? Is it going to be horror? Is it going to be dystopian? Is it going to be romance? If you hit that and you're a good writer and the story clicks, you're in. But you can be a great writer with a great story and there's no room for you in the inn. So that's kind of, and you're right, it can get depressing. You can feel really bad about yourself. You think you're not worthy, all this kind of stuff. And then it's just shelf space. It really comes down to, I remember on a lot of the rejections that I got were glowing. Like another friend of mine who'd been published many times in trad said, I've never gotten such great rejection letters ever. Like they've never said this good stuff about my work. But they said that every one of them ended with, we took it to marketing. Marketing says, where do we put this book on the shelves in a traditional store? And it was clearly the kiss of death that I thought it was cool. I'm sitting here at my desk going, I will mix a little bit of cool fantasy in with the steampunk so there'll be magic and this will be awesome. And then when it hit that, it was like, this is not awesome. Where does this go? Plus, they also thought steampunk was going to be a huge sell for them in YA. And it just didn't turn out that way. It was something they gambled on that didn't pay off for whatever reason with the young adult crowd.
Yeah, I think I've kind of found with steampunk in general that it's like a bigger movement than it actually is, than there actually are people interested in the books. It's very kind of a small little niche. The only stuff I've managed to sell well is kind of stuff that crosses over into swords and sorcery and epic fantasy kind of stuff.
Well, and I think in self-pub, that has been what has saved my series, is the fact that I did put fantasy in it. I did something daring and different and not 100% staunch steampunk. And I found readers as adults who love it, just love it. So, in a roundabout way, maybe it was exactly where that book should have gone. It might have, if I'd have gotten that contract, maybe it wouldn't have succeeded in YA. So it's kind of interesting.
You do have really gorgeous covers, I'll say, for anybody who's not on the video and can't see the books behind you.
Yeah.
Are they, how did you go about getting your covers? Are they custom photo shoots?
Yeah, that was interesting. I got into self-pub like many people do and tried to work with tried to find a cover artist and had a bad experience the first time around and things were not going well. And I was like, I gotta bail. This is not this is just not working out. And of course, I had planned everything and, talked about this big launch. And then all of a sudden, I had, it was at the 11th hour and I had no cover. I'm like, oh no. So I said to one of my friends, he's also a writer, and she just happens to be involved in TV and movies here in Canada. And I said, well, I'm just going to have to buy a stock photo and see what I can do to it because I'm just out of time. And she was like, no, 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 no. Your vision was so cool. No, no, no. Give me an hour. Give me a few hours. And she got a hold of this guy who's a great photographer. And he didn't mind to do some creative work. And then a good friend in writing as well, her daughter is the girl on the cover. So another author friend of mine. So I called her, can I borrow your daughter? And then I bought the dress from Etsy, and then I souped it up a little bit, and I got the necklace from Etsy. And my son, one of my sons, I have three, the second one, he was just finishing animation school in Toronto at the time. So he was able to do some special effects. And then I shipped off this gorgeous affected piece to, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget her name now, May I Design. And she added just the perfect fonts and treatment and came up with a cover. So, and then the second cover, I held a contest in my hometown at the high school for anybody who was interested in drama to be the guy on the cover. And this lovely, great big, I think he's 6'6", tall dude came walking in, and he was all like lithe and moving like this, just like my character. And he had the long hair, and I was like, oh my gosh, that is just exactly Ehrlich. So him and his mom came to the interview, and I hired him. And so we went down to Toronto and did a photo shoot, and then did one with the two of them together as well. So yeah, that's how it happened.
They look really cool. I would have totally thought you had like a traditional published, they definitely look like that.
That was definitely my goal when I started out. I had this thing, right? Because a lot of my traditional pub friends, they didn't understand why I wanted to do this. And I was getting comments like, oh, it's too bad you gave up so soon. You were so close. And, it's going to be okay. And then I was like, oh, they don't see this as me being an entrepreneur, so I was like, I am going to make a cover that's so darn good that no one is even going to know on the shelves that it's not self-pub, that it's not trad pub. And I'm going to make everybody just kind of like eat their words. And so when it came out, it was funny because I wasn't that into a social networking system at that time. And it got picked up just from people passing it around. I had over 2,000 shares on the first cover from bloggers I didn't even know and all kinds of stuff. It blew up the night I put it out. So that was exciting.
Yeah, that's very cool. How did you go about, or how did Amazon contact you? What went into getting signed with their imprint?
Okay, so it was about a year after, almost 9 months after I published. And it was kind of comical because my agent was very supportive in the beginning, and he was going to try to, support me in my self-pub as well as trad pub ventures. And then it just didn't work. It was just difficult. So we parted amicably. And I just thought, well, I'm going to do this. So, later, if I ever need another agent, I'll worry about that. And so apparently this editor looked up my information and saw he was my agent. So she contacted him. And then he contacted me, and he was like, hey, guess what just happened? And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. After, 5 years of an association with a dry well, then, hey, guess what? So she wanted actually to see other work by me. She didn't want Lumiere because it had already been published. And she was in love with it, but she was like, it's just harder for Amazon to really promote a title that's already been out there for a while than to pick a new one. Like, it'd be more advantageous for me to have a new one. Well, I didn't have a new one. So then we were going to just talk about it later. And then she called me back and said, you know what? No, I thought about this and I want Lumiere if you're willing. So I was like, well, why not? Right? Take this adventure, see where it goes. I had done pretty good with it on my own in that year. I mean, I was none of the big sellers that you've had on here. That did not happen for me out of the chute, but it was slow and steady and growing. and doing well, like just a slow burn kind of book. And then I was like, well, why not? So I signed up, and then they didn't even know I had Noir almost done. So then in those discussions, I was just about to put it up for pre-order, and she was like, "Whoa, no, 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 wait a minute." So she took the 2 books.
Okay, and it looks like you released the third one on your own. So did they decide that they just didn't want to continue with the series, or did you decide to part ways with them?
Yeah, no, I didn't decide to part ways. They often they have a different business model. They just have a different business model, and they often just take 2 books in a series. Um, if it had really gone gangbusters out of the gate for them, I'm sure they would have purchased the third one. But it didn't. Like I said, it was a slow burn. It still does very well for them, and it's cyclical, kind of like goes through like a couple of months, it's all right, and then it boosts again, and it goes up and down. So it's kind of like, I guess, a high mid-lister, I would say, in the old system. And but it does pretty good, and so they like it. But they just didn't, at the time when they were negotiating, when I was going to bring it out, they just didn't. Now, another interesting thing about Amazon is they never close the door. So they say, just recently I had a discussion with my editor, and she was like, well, never say never. Like, if it starts to really pick up that third book, then we'll be talking. And I was like, oh. So that's another interesting feature about them is, your books don't have to die after a certain amount of time. And if they see potential in something, they will come back to the table. So that's interesting too.
Do you feel that they've done a lot more for you than you could have done on your own? Because I know a lot of indie authors say, like, if I could get a deal with Amazon, that'd be like the one publisher I would, no brainer, I would say yes to. What were your thoughts?
I would say that definitely for this series, it was a good choice because, as you know, with the steampunk situation, it needs to be more than just being floated around in the steampunk channels. Like you were saying, it's a niche kind of read. The series has a lot more going on in it. The focus is not steampunk. Like, the focus is diversity, inclusion. It has themes of, belonging. It's a romance. It's an adventure. It's many things. So there's like many arms of, marketing you could use to promote it. On my own, I was thinking very like narrow, I see now. And I was going after like one thing because that's all I understood from Trad Pub was like, you put what it is on the book and you go after that crowd, right? And Amazon is like, no, 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 no. Like, there's readers everywhere. There's readers interested in this facet of it or that facet of it or this section of it. So I find for this particular series, this was smart for me because they keep feeding it to different people every now and again. And it's been out for over a year, and it's still doing strong and still finding readership. And it's, I don't know if I would have been able to do that with a niche book. I can't answer for any other kind of book experience because I don't know, but I can say this, that the Amazon model is a completely different thing. You need to get trad publishing out of your head if you're going to work with Amazon. You need to embrace their way of business, and then you will not be disappointed. If you go in with thoughts of trad pub stream, the mainstream kind of idea, you will be disappointed, period. You will be saying, oh, well, they didn't come through with this and they didn't come through with that, because they don't operate that way. They don't go after sales that way. It's a different way of handling things. For instance, they're not that concerned with getting their authors like Publishers Weekly reviews or any of the big kind of things that the traditional authors get immediately before they come out the chute. They're not that interested in that. I know that things are changing a little bit, and some of their authors, they are doing that now with. But that doesn't, in their brain, it doesn't make or break a book. And it doesn't. I mean, they can make sales happen without having big time reviews. They still send your book out. I mean, I have a school library journal review that's glowing on the second book, which I thought was really strange when it happened. I was like, why would they pick the second book and not read the first book? But that's interesting. And it turned out to be on my audiobook, I believe. So I was like, wow, that's cool. But they always advance you through, but it's not their main concern. Their main concern is finding readership and building sales within their own house, within their own capacity. So.
Okay, and one last question for me, because I feel like I've become kind of a control freak, I guess, about my books. I guess it would kill me if I didn't have control of being able to lower the price and run sales on book one in my series, especially since they haven't yet. Maybe they will get your book three, but I guess I don't know how many books you have planned in the series, but do you see that as a downside at all? Or I don't know, you just got a Kindle Daily deal, so maybe they're doing plenty.
Yeah. That's a mixed bag again, right? Like you give up some control to get some exposure that you could maybe not reach, right? I was lucky. I said, they wanted to buy my covers. I said, you cannot have my books without my covers. And they were like, good, because we want your covers. And I was like, good, this is all working out. And I'm going to design them. They're just going to stay the way I want them. And they're like, okay. I was like, good, we got that covered. Because I'm a control freak like you too about that. So that kind of stuff was fine. Yes, sometimes, like when I brought out book three, I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm going to drown. There's no way that I can do this because I can't discount book one. But then I got smart and I started to just follow what they do. So I brought it out right after they did Kindle monthly deal or something like that. Like they put it on sale for something. And I brought it out when my pre-order was available when that happened. So that launched it. And I was like, okay, a little bit of a launch there. And then, it's the good and bad of that is every time they do a promotion, the book is there. The series is complete in 3 books. So people just need to go find that last one and they're done. The benefit is, and Amazon's really cool about this, they're like, you get to make the money off third book. Like whatever happens, if this does slow burn and keep selling and selling, the money for the third book is all yours. And that's wonderful. I've also been invited to write novellas all around it in the world. I wrote a Christmas novella and put it out. It was pretty close to Christmas. I was a little bit late on that one though. But I have other ones planned for the characters within the book. And they're cool with that. They're like, yeah, sure, pump it out there. The more attention you can get around it, the better. And it's yours. So from that aspect, you have like an ability to make extra income and control that part of the income. But you're right. Not having control of book one is, it is what it is. But I'm finding that the longer you're in the Amazon machine, let's say, they have a regular scheduling of promotion and they pay attention to their people and they put you through the channel and they are constantly trying to move their books, which is, I look at some of my friends at the time when I did this, I was kind of despondent that I, didn't get the trad deal, of course. And I have some very famous friends. So they were getting some really big deals. And I was like, oh gosh, but a lot of those people's books are no longer out there. They had to make or break it within the first couple of months. And then they all got their books sent back and then they feel horrible about that. And they're struggling for a second deal maybe, or whatever happened to them. I'm seeing all kinds of stuff. I'm seeing them orphaned. I'm seeing their contracts being broken. I'm seeing, a lot of them that are awesome writers can't get a second deal because that first book just, sold like mine. It sold good enough, but not amazing. So they're getting ignored. And I think to myself, well, there's my little book, my little series still ticking along, and it's still getting refreshed, refresh button, refresh button. So I think in that way, if you can embrace that idea that you're not going to get, Amazon doesn't do a big kick out of the chute. They let your book do what it's going to do. And then their marketing kicks in afterward, after, say, the new, because you get like new book available or, best in whatever or whatever. So it's kind of up there and getting cycled around in the Amazon machine in the beginning. And when that wears out, they kick in. But if you're thinking the trad way, you're panicking because you're like, I have 30 days. Everyone has to know about my book and nothing's happening. And it's not true. So that's one of the benefits of Amazon, I think.
All right, cool. Well, thanks for breaking that down. And it sounds like actually a really good deal for you, especially since you do have the 3 books planned.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you had an 8-book series planned out, that might be a little more challenging, not having your book one. But
Right.
that's awesome that they're continuing to promote it, and it sounds like it's been a good way to go.
Yeah, I think for this particular series, it has been. I do. It's a little different going into Amazon as well as as somebody who's already self-pubbed. So because it's already been a book out there and been seen by people and purchased for a year, they couldn't put it into a lot of, rightly, they could not put it into a lot of their promotions where they push it as a brand new Amazon book, as a new title. So I would say that puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage. And if I was to do it again, I would prefer to sell them a brand new series and get the full ride benefit versus having it promoted as a title that was already released. But I mean, this has been great for this series, and I think it's been a good experience for this series. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, let the guys ask a few questions, and then in the second half, we're going to ask you for some tips on the plotting and the editing.
Yes.
Yep. I'm going to ask you some just about steampunk in general. You were talking about how it's kind of tricky to find a place for steampunk because it will contain science fiction and fantasy. So what do you think defines something as steampunk?
To me, it was anything that involved science of machinery. Like there's certain themes in steampunk, like man versus machine, and world. There's always like oppression of women within a hierarchical society. There's usually some kind of component of like world disaster, or it's I always say kind of steampunked out dystopian element. That to me was, regular steampunk would fit within that. And of course, it's everything that runs prior to the combustion engine. It runs on steam or pulleys or cranks or whatever. So the machinery and the gadgets and inventions all should follow within that realm, which I stuck to. I stuck to all of those themes. All I did was mix a little bit of fantasy in it for fun. Like the inventor in my book, the young man that she meets, all of his inventions are somewhat enchanted. So there's a flying bike hydrogen cycle in the book that he's created. And the young girl, when she discovers it, she catches it breathing and she's freaked right out. And so, his backstory is that he does not believe outwardly in fantasy, in magic. He only believes in science, yet he's secretly created everything slightly enchanted. And so he's constantly trying to hide the fact that his machines, there's a sugar and creamer that race along the table and move and rise up and pour into the tea, sugar, and the one finishes its duty and falls down and burps. And he's like, makes it appear to be him, so she doesn't catch that the machine is enchanted. So just a little flavor like that, right, to make it interesting and different. But apparently that was my kiss of death.
Yeah, it's amazing how well this will make it fun and interesting, yes, but also uncategorizable,
unsaleable.
So for a lot of people, as Lindsay was saying, it's a lot like for a lot of people, steampunk is as much about the aesthetic as the story. Do you find yourself spending a lot of time describing outfits and gadgets, more so than, say, in other genres you might have tried?
Oh, absolutely. That was what drew me to it. I couldn't wait to like describe some crazy inventions and come up with them. My background is my dad owned a tool and die shop. And I was around the shop from the time I was a little girl. Like, he used to take us into work on Saturdays, me and my sister, and he would put a pallet on the forklift, put us on the pallet, and then rise it up over, to the top and pull it up over a lathe and be like, I got to work. You girls stay where you're safe. Now imagine that, because that's not safe at all, but that was my dad's idea of safe. We were up there, he knew where we were, and he ran the heavy machinery. So my sister and I would spend hours, looking down, watching him, working on a lathe, dropping a press, whatever, creating these. And then later, every one of us in the family had to work at the shop because my dad wanted us to understand business. So we all did our time. And so I worked there for a while. And machinery, the smell of machinery, steel shavings in my shoes is just like a natural thing. So I was sitting at dinner and somebody was talking about writing this stuff. And I said, what is this stuff? And they started saying, well, you got to know about machines. This girl actually signed a contract. And she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do because I don't know anything about machines. And I was like, I can so write that in my sleep. So then I got into it and I loved it, right? So to me, that invention stuff was like what my dad and I did on Saturdays together. We came up with, like, he'd bring home blueprints and we'd design stuff. So yeah, and the dresses are cool. And I tried to make the language somewhat authentic, without like overdoing it to the point you can't read, or you tire of reading too much of it. So yeah, I love that kind of stuff. I actually think some of the readers accused me in the third book of doing too much description of the machines. But it was funny because in the second book, I got complaints there weren't enough. So I pumped it up in the third book. And people were like, no, that was too much now. So.
Yeah, that was actually going to be a follow-up question is, do you feel like, how do you prevent the amount of description from getting in the way of the story? Like, do you sort of rely upon your own enthusiasm for the information to sort of leak into the reader, or do you, well, as you said, try to moderate the amount?
Yeah, it was funny because I didn't think about it in book one. I just wrote the book and I did it with all the training I have in mind with writing. Like, so story comes first, character comes first, detail brings character to life, details bring setting to life. One of the things that's commented a lot in my series is that the setting is like a character of its own. And that was something that I wanted to do, that I loved doing. That was something that when I sat down with Don Moss, that was the first thing he said to me was, this is one of the coolest story environments I've read in a long time. And it lives and breathes like a character in the book. And I was like, yes, because that's what I wanted to do. And I think when you do that, when you keep that in mind, you can gauge it naturally. It should be organic. It should be to strengthen character, or strengthen the moment, or strengthen the plot point that you're driving toward. It shouldn't just be you go off on a tangent. I need to describe a spaceship now, or a airship now, or I need to describe a dress now. It should be part of what they're doing. So in the first one, I feel like it happened very organically. Then in the second one, I feel like it took a bit of a different turn, because one of the things that's very challenging to write is I had both my characters in the second book end up imprisoned without each other, and it was in two voices, and they were both behind bars. So then it was like, dang, now somebody's got to save them, and they got to talk. So third voice comes out in this book. So I think because of where they went on their journey, there was a little less of it, and people were like, I didn't like that. So then in the third book was the only time that I consciously went, I will now inject some more. And see, should not do that, because people were like, too much. So.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works out. And it stands to reason how the first book would be sort of easier to gauge how much description for stuff should be in it because it's the first book and everything is being introduced for the first time. So
Right.
even a reader who maybe isn't that into that level of description will understand, well, I need to know what it looks like. I
Mm-hmm.
just want to say this is kind of coincidental. I also write some steampunk, and my second steampunk book features two of my main characters getting locked up in prison. So,
And
great
that's
minds.
difficult, isn't it? You write yourself into a corner and go,
Yeah,
okay, now who's talking? Because mine's the
uh,
first, so.
exactly. Just one more question, and then I'll head you off to Jeff. But as you mentioned earlier, well, steampunk is usually linked to a Victorian setting, and Victorian setting tends to have certain societal conventions. One of which would be, a very structured society and women in a certain position and men in a certain position. I was going to ask if you include that in your story, and clearly you do. So, like, how crucial and how central to the story do you feel that is?
I think it's really huge in mine because my main character, Eyelet, she has epilepsy. So her father came to this realization very young. In their society, if you are caught practicing magic or being a little off, let's say, in any way, you are dipped in wax, hot wax, and hung in the center square on view for all to learn not to participate in this, or thrown in the asylum. And so with that fear, the father decided to create a machine which would have been like the first X-ray machine, and I call it the Illuminator in the book. And he was on a mission to examine his daughter's head to see what was going on, to fix her so she wouldn't live this life of possible death or, asylum. And he dies in a great unexplained flash that wipes out their son and leaves this land in eternal twilight with rolling toxic vapor. And when he dies, Eyelet is left hiding her secret on her own. So that's kind of the opening. We see her when she's little. And then the next chapter, we roll forward. She's 17, searching for her father's machine, hiding her illness to correct her own self. And then she goes on this adventure to the darkest part of the world after the machine. And so she defies every law there is for girls because she must get to this machine before her father's arch nemesis, this professor, finds out he is also after the secrets of the machine. And if he finds out her truth, she's done. So even though she comes from this she's very sheltered because of the epilepsy in the beginning of the book, and she's been looked after, and she comes from that kind of situation. She has to, one of the things I was after was she's an ordinary girl who has to bust out the courage big time and be a very strong woman to get through this adventure and get what she needs and protect those she loves. So yeah, I played with it a lot. Like, there's a scene where she's unchaperoned in the market square and the men are going to do what they want with her, and she has to fight her way out of it. And she has to commandeer a ride on the carriage when she sees the machine being taken off, and so she runs and jumps on the back of it, and that kind of thing. So it's all very tied in to that. But yeah, huge themes in the book.
Yeah, it's something that, like, I did not have any sort of formal training when it comes to writing. I just read a lot of books and then started
Mm-hmm.
writing, and I'm steadily becoming more and more aware of the fact that anything that can create friction and conflict makes for a much more interesting story. So, well,
Absolutely.
you got to install a lot of taboos so that you can start breaking them.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
All right, well, that's it for my questions. I'm going to hand you off to Jeff for the last couple.
Alrighty. And I have to pardon the camera. Camera decided to flip me off, so I flipped it off back, and no camera, so no worries. Okay, so when it comes to steampunk titles, as Joe mentioned earlier, many readers are expecting to discover cool gadgets, see interesting outfits, and so on. Naturally, that got me to think about what tropes are expected in steampunk story. What elements do you feel should be included in any title that calls itself steampunk?
Well, I don't like to tell people what to do, first of all. I think if their story is their story, they they, if they have a vision, they should go with it. But that said, I think readers will be expecting a certain kind of like trope set. And I think those things are some of the things we already discussed, like themes about man versus machine are really big. Machinery gone wild, being misused by the general public in some way. I explore that theme in that the illuminator that's originally made for good and, to do something good is then exploited to do something terrible, like many things in the healthcare industry are. And so relatability, that's another thing. Even though you're playing in Victorian time and you're playing with these ideals of the past, they're not really the past. Like oppression of women is still going on. I mean, go teach for a little while. You'll figure that one out. And there's many other jobs, I'm sure, that, that happens. There's the idea of man versus machine is everywhere. Like we're, Big Brother is like the era we're kind of in, right? The internet and things and stuff going on. So I think relatability, if you can take it and relate it to something today, but explore something from then, I think you've hooked people. But yeah, those themes are very important. And just using like, if you put like a flying car into a steampunk book, you're probably going to have people railing against you. So you just need to be aware of that. Now, mind you, I know another YA book that was released and they took out all the authentic Victorian language and made it popular teen because they thought the teens would be more interested to read that. And the teens were angry. They didn't like the book. So I think you stay true to some of the values and then you hook it to today's society though still.
Yeah, well, you were mentioning, and you were mentioning that like the car being a flying car and there are people that are going like, leads me into, as you already mentioned a little bit on this, being able to successfully describe these gadgets that inevitably seem to find their way into your novels would suggest the author has a higher understanding of engineering or has some sort of experience with it. Now, you've already mentioned that your childhood has pretty much been steeped inside a machine shop. So my question is, have you ever had a fan tell you that something you created was unrealistic?
No, because I think it's all very unrealistic. I think here's the key to that. I think, honestly, I believe that readers will buy absolutely anything if you are able to extend believability. If you are able to make them buy in and become so enthralled with the story and so deep into your world, and they'll just, extend believability to this, you can write anything. And I think that it's a skill you have to work at. You have to really make people want to buy it. Like, I always go to like, what was that? Aliens of the Galaxy, or what was the name of that movie? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on it. Guardian of the Galaxy. Like, seriously, a talking tree and a raccoon with a gun. And we were all like, yeah, for sure this is real. And it's because they were able to build that bridge between, suspension of disbelief. They were able to build that bridge and it worked. And so I think that's key. I mean, I think it's funny when people will rail about silly things in my book. Like, there's a flying hydrogen cycle with bat wings, okay? And it breathes and it chortles and it laughs. And that's all okay. But in the second book, I made a mistake and had one character had shaved his head for a reason in the end of book 1. And in book 2, his blonde curls blew in the wind. And someone right away wrote and said, oh, like I'm sure it hasn't been like a full 2 months and this guy's hair is back. I don't believe it. And they're riding a mechanical elephant and they're flying in this beast and they're doing some of the most outlandish things with outlandish inventions. But there you go. It was the reality points, the points of high reality that people were like, I don't buy that. Somebody wrote and said, I don't think Eilert changed her clothes in the whole book, and that's just disgusting. Like, she didn't change her clothing, and I was like, okay, that's funny that they would notice that, right?
Yeah, I've had fans tell me. Yeah, I've had fans tell me, "He's like, yeah, your books are good." Man, doesn't anybody ever have to go to the bathroom or something in your books? I was like, yeah, that's given. That's assumed. I'm not going to go dwell on it. Thank you very much. But
yeah.
All right. My last question for you on this section here is, since I know that there are a lot of steampunk authors out there that would love to make more sales, what, if any, are some common mistakes that you've seen in other titles that you feel are preventing the books from selling more copies? Bad covers, blurbs, poor descriptions of gadgets. What would you think?
I would say that to me, your cover needs to tell a story. It tells a mini story. It's what you're going to present. Like, it has completely the necklace, the girl holding the necklace on my front book has the intrigue factor. You know, it's got to be about this necklace. Something's going on with this necklace. There's going to be mystery. I think a lot of the problems is people will just put up steampunk things. Like, they'll go to Shutterstock and they'll be like steampunk category, and there'll be gadgets and wheels and stuff, and they'll make that their cover. But it doesn't draw the reader into, like, what is this story happening? They might get too technical. I find that if the technical stuff outweighs, like if they're just really into machinery and they're going on and on and on about it, and there's no story plot there, you're going to lose people. Stories are about characters going on journeys, and all the stuff that surrounds that is extra. And it's the dressing that makes it beautiful and steampunk feeling. But it really boils down to the character and the promise that you make to the reader in the beginning of the book. You need to follow through. I was in love with this one steampunk book, which will remain nameless. And the opening chapter had me so badly. And I was like, I cannot wait to delve into this world and go on this journey. And then literally the chapter next, we left that world and went off somewhere else. I didn't care about that somewhere else. I kept flipping chapters, hoping to get back to where. So the promise of your first chapter is a promise to the reader. What you're going to offer them. This is the adventure. This is the story. This is the endearment of these characters. Here we go. And if you veer from that, I don't think it's good.
Don't tease, essentially. Right. Got it. But alrighty, that's it for my questions. Let me hand it over to Lindsay. We can get started on the editing and plotting books section.
Yeah, I think your editing book is your most recent release. Is that right? TikTok edits?
Yeah. It's
so,
just a little, it's a very small book, and it's I basically put in the 10 things that I've learned from editors, from New York editors at the big houses, from freelance editors that are amazing that I've worked with, from very talented people. They are very simple little tricks, but they strengthen every manuscript. If you go over those 10 things after you're done a manuscript, it's almost like you go, oh, no brainer. Like, wow, that did make that stronger. Like, that's so easy. But writers have so much to do. You know, we're balancing so many plates in the air that we get it done. We're like, okay, I think this is good. But then we don't kind of like go to the micro management level of looking at the sentences and how they roll off the tongue and how, and editors will do that. But it's a cool thing to go through some of those and really catch yourself. It's little things like, he sat down. You don't need to say down. When you sit, you're going down. Like, he sat is so much more crisp. Or, one of the worst one was I nod my head. Well, you don't nod anything else, so don't put my head, right? And when you're in an exchange of dialogue, that's when it becomes really important and it becomes crisp and back forth is when you leave out all the extras, right? But you don't always get to that point, I think. And, you don't see it until someone reminds you. So it's a reminder book, a checklist.
Yeah, it's actually when I've had to do flash fiction in the past or something where you really had a tight word count. I think as novelists, we like, oh, the more the better. I'm trying to get my 5,000 words a day. But that's I think it's probably good for anybody to have to do that, to actually shave some words off, because then you start getting into that mindset of, like you're saying, there's some more succinct ways to say things.
Exactly. And the crisper you do that, especially in dialogue passages, the more your reader will be enthralled and endeared to your character because they feel more natural and they feel more real on the page. And you don't need to, people think you need to stage direct a lot and tell people he's now moving here, he's now doing it this way. They will actually get more out of it when you have less. So that's something I've learned from. I've had some great experiences, even though I didn't get published. I got to know very outgoing. So I got to know as many editors and agents and things as I possibly could. And each one of them had like a little gift basket that they left me with. And so that's kind of what's in that book.
All right. Are there any in particular, when you pick up self-published titles, that you kind of see a lot of authors doing over and over?
Yeah, I see just that kind of thing that I was talking about, like your dialogue, it's stronger if it stands alone. Like I see a lot of people feeling the need to say constantly, he said, or after each little exchange. So like, for example, if you were having one like that went something like, you need to get out of here, he said. Yeah, well, make me, she said curmudgeonly. I'm not going to make you. You just leave, she said, slowly. And it's like, yeah, no, you're making it feel like a written scripture. If you just said, you need to get out of here, really? Just make me? Yeah, whatever. He turned and, exited the room in a storm. It'd be better, right? You use motion to give across, like action to bring across the mood or the tone of the moment, and just let a lot of that dialogue stand on its own. So sometimes I'll be reading and I'll be like, oh, this is so good. And if they would just like slice these little, I almost like want to slice it and send it. Hey, don't mean, I'm like, that would be rude. But I'm like, no, I'm just like, hey, dude, I really love your writing. And this would be so cool if you could just like lose a little bit of this. It would be even better. So, but I do that with traditionally pub stuff too. Sometimes I'll be like we sell sweet corn, our family does, on the corner in a little tent in the summer. And there was a really famous book that was talking about a corn being not in a field, but in something else. And it was like grating on my spine. I was like, I need to write him and say it should be field. He's saying the wrong word every time in this book, right? But I was like, no, refrain.
Yeah, especially when you're kind of in that editing mindset too, it's hard to just read for enjoyment sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's potential, right? Like I don't mean it in yeah, majestic country. I don't mean it in like a rude way. I mean it in an empowering way. Like I see the writing is so awesome, and I'm like, wow, they could be even more empowered if they just did this much cutting. This scene would rock out, So it's just me. That's what I do.
All right. Do you have any tips for, we always tell indie authors to make sure, and if you pay nobody else, pay an editor to go over your manuscript. But some people, it's hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, and some people they're doing their first couple books on a shoestring and maybe can't. Have you come across any software or just any techniques that might be helpful for somebody who can't afford an editor and just trying to make it as clean as possible?
Well, the tips book will help do some of it. Will help you get like some redundancies and stuff out of your books. But I really think there's no other way than having a second set of eyes on your book. It doesn't matter how meticulous you are. Your brain reads what your brain sees on the page or knows because you've gone over it 100 times. You really just have to hire an editor. But finding a good editor that fits with you, because everybody has their own voice, their own style, their own technique. Some editors will try to flatten that, and that person's just not for you. It's tough. I would say that's the biggest challenge, is finding a right fit editor at the right cost too. Because like you said, it's very expensive. But if you're going to spend money, that's where I would spend the money. I mean, it's terrible, but I've spent $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 on some books to get them where I wanted them. I've tried now to cut down on that as a self-pubber, but when I was going through trad, I worked with story development coaches that literally were $2,500. That's it, period. You want to learn, this is what you pay. And I learned a ton. I mean, that's what I ended up compiling into my plotting book too. I can't thank those people enough for the hours I spent learning from them about plotting, because now it just saves my life. Every time I'm ready to write a book, I'm not in the dark groping and searching. I know exactly where I need to go, and I pinpoint the important points, and then I can create the rest. So, I mean, it was a lot of money I spent probably to learn that, but I think it's, worth it in the end.
Sure, it's like any other trade. You have to invest in your education.
Yeah, that's how I looked at it, as I was spending money like crazy for a while. They were trying to get traditionally published. I was like, yes, well, I'm investing in my future. And I was a little frightened about it all, but in hindsight, I just see how much I've grown, and I'm able to plot so much quicker. And I've shared it with friends, and they can plot so much quicker. So and not just quickly, but correctly. So, it gets you into the beats that are necessary to hold a reader in their seat, and not, so you don't end up with one section of your book drawing out, and, reader fatigue, they might put it down. They're going to give up on this story. But it gives you a plot around a clock. So you use each quarter of the clock to balance your story. So from 1 to 3 is Act 1. From 3 to 9 is essentially Act 2 with a break at 6, which would be your midpoint, your highest point of action. And then from 9 to 12 is Act 3. And so when you literally plot point with sticky notes, I do it the old way with a great big round circle on a piece of Bristol board, and I, do the sticky notes. When I realize I've got 10 sticky notes from 1 to 3, 27 from 3 to 6, 5 from 6 to 9, and 4 to finish the book, I've got a problem. Either I don't know where my midpoint is, or I'm building to the wrong piece of action, or I don't need all that junk from 3 to 6. And I sit and I balance it all out before I begin. And that doesn't mean that I write and people are like, I don't want to plot because I don't want to write every single thing out. I want to create as I go. I don't want to either. That's not what I do. I pick the high points, the 3, the 6, the 9 o'clock. If I know my 3, 6, 9, I know where I'm going. So 3 is like going into the new world. Whatever happens that sends them on their journey, the catalyst, we've sprung into a new world. 6 is the highest point of action. What happens? What are they after? What have they obtained? What is the situation they almost got to? And of course, it's going to go wrong. Then there's going to be like the lowest point of action at 7 when they realize, oh my gosh, I'm toast. I'm never going to get this. Then they have an aha moment. They realize something and they go like crazy to 9. And then of course 9, the battle ensues, the real fight for the girl, the sword, the kingdom, the whatever. 9 to 11, you do that. 11 to 12, you see the life afterward, the afterglow, I call it, when they've achieved their goal. What have they gotten out of it? What has the world gotten out of it? How has everything improved? And so when I pinpoint those spots, then I have a roadmap and I can go from there. I can make it go finer if I want to, but I don't have to too. And it saves a lot of time. It saves a lot of not writing yourself into corners. When I first started doing it, I had no idea what 6 o'clock was ever. I would know 3, I would know 9, I would know the beginning, I would know the ending. I would know generally what they were after. I wouldn't know what the big high point was. And I'd be like, I'll write to it. And then I would get going and just be lost and spend days like commiserating and freaking out because I should just throw this story away. And then learning this really, and putting it on the clock. For me, it worked on the clock because otherwise I didn't like that mountain thing you used to draw in high school where it was like, oh, it goes here and then it falls off, because it doesn't fall off. To me, it's a circle that begins and ends and closes, and everything gets tied up neatly. And so the action continues to go. So anyway, that's
Oh, it
that.
sounds cool. And I was going to ask you about the plotting book next, so you took
Yeah,
care. I didn't
I
have to
just did
ask
it.
about it.
Yeah.
I've actually not heard the clock thing before, and I like that because I'm someone who's very chronological. I do an outline. This is what happens, this is what happens, this is what happens. And I think that would work with, it's basically an outline around the clock, right? So
Yeah,
it's,
you can do that. If you would like that, you can definitely do that. And what I do is I figure, like Don Moss always basically says, if you haven't got them to that new world or off on that new adventure by 30 pages, you're risking them shutting the book. So get their ass there as fast as, can I swear?
that's all right. We won't
There
tell
as
anyone.
as possible. And get them on the journey, right? Get them hooked and get them on the journey. And then at that point, things always get murky. From 3 to 6, everything gets murky. You start going, oh gosh, where am I supposed to go? Well, then basically Don teaches, kind of, it's a combination of his teaching, James Scott Bell that I learned from, Christopher Vogler, who saved Disney back in the 80s from making terrible cartoons. And those guys all get together, they do this thing called Story Masters, and they give you their theory of it. And it basically almost all is the same, and it kind of follows Save the Cat as well. It's a bit different. And what I've written in the book follows it, but it's not exactly Save the Cat. It's a little more tailored to writing. And then, at those like points on the clock, so I put them on the clock then. So at 7 o'clock, this beat should happen. By 8, this beat should be happening. By 9, this beat should be happening. And it's rough. It can swing a bit. You can do it by 10. You can do it by 7. You don't have to do it right at, 9 or whatever. But within that range, okay, this should be happening. And then when you really lay out your stuff, like you're saying, you can see, oh, well, it took way too long to get to here. Or, gee, that went too fast. Or maybe I need to beat that up. That's not a really exciting high stakes thing. What else can I do there? And it's really cool. And that's what it really saved me from writing into holes. And I love it now. I do it for the heck of it on a grid. And I've got books figured out for like 6, 7, 8 projects ahead. Because I'll just get all excited about it and go, oh, I can do one for that. Okay. And which is kind of crazy. But I mean, it can become addictive.
Well, that sounds like a good idea, though, for when you have an idea, but you don't have the time to start it yet. But if you had all that down, then
do a clock.
you can remember later, what you were doing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, let me send it to the guys to ask a few more questions, and then we'll let you go.
Yep. All right, so back to editing for a second.
Okay.
If you anticipate having a professional editor go over your writing, and as we've said, most people should think about that, how much time do you feel you should spend cleaning up things like grammar? Like, should you spend time and do a sweep on that, or should you devote most of your editing time on things like, the story and the flow?
I think that's an interesting question. I've had an experience, I don't know if this is true of other people, but I have an experience that if you don't have a clean enough manuscript, you get charged more. So I feel like as much as the little stuff, like the low-hanging fruit that you can knock off, like spelling and grammar and that you should. That said, I never get that all knocked off. But I mean, I would rather spend my money on someone telling me inconsistencies in the book that I've messed up just because it's, 460 pages and I forgot this dude wasn't wearing a shirt and he's suddenly focal point over here is he's got this shirt. I need to know that. I would rather have them comment on what they feel is working in my world and what isn't, and I can tweak that, than to be, just, I think a proof pass is grammar and spelling. Like, I ideally want to do a copy edit pass, which always inevitably with my editor includes some story development commenting like that and inconsistencies. But then I also want to do a proof pass, because once you go in and fix stuff, you've made mistakes again, period. You just have. And even then, you're not going to catch them all. Nobody, humanly, they don't. I mean, within a real trad situation, they do a copy edit pass. They do a developmental pass. They do a copy edit pass, and they do at least 2 proofs. And that would cost you a fortune in the real world, sadly. But I mean, for some of these authors that are making good dollars, I would be doing that because that's only going to strengthen what your product is. But I would say do your very best. I mean, do at least a copy edit pass and try to do a proof pass, even if it's a beta proof pass. Have beta readers say, oh, you've got 10 mistakes on this page or whatever, you know? I don't know. But I think it's individual too. Like some people write really cleanly. I have a friend who very rarely makes any mistakes. I don't get that. But needs a lot of help developmentally. Like needs, literally I have to write on the page, hey, where's the emotion? Inject emotion. I'm not feeling this. Like this is a big moment and I don't care. Fix this, you know? And they do.
Yeah. And I know that on the subject of being charged more, if you have a particularly messy manuscript, I've been charged in a few different ways, and one of them was by the hour. And I guarantee if someone's charging you by the hour, that you are going to be charging a fair amount more if you have got a very, very messy manuscript.
Right.
All right. So another editing question is: a lot of editors like to keep a style guide to sort of keep track of story and series specific terms and linguistic quirks. Place names, character names, departures from standard English. Do you think it's worth developing one of those for yourself?
I would love that. I think that is like a Bible. If you're going to do a long series, who is that editor? Because like, I totally love that editor. Yeah. I want them doing that for me, but
my editor does that for me. Tammy Sellier. We've actually interviewed her.
Oh, that is special. That is good. I actually paid a side, PA or what do you call it, to do that with Lumiere because I was under the gun to get Noir done and I knew there was some things I wasn't going to remember. And so she went over it with fresh eyes and picked all that out. I mean, I set up the grid and she filled it in, but excellent. That I think is invaluable. Yeah, that along with now I'm using Scrivener. I got like goaded into it. Everybody kept talking about it. So I finally tried and I'm using that for stuff like that. But I mean, to have that as a visual while you're writing, it would be, yeah, that's gold.
Yeah, I did not know that I should have been having it until she handed me one. And I'm like, oh, wow, I should go through and reread all of my stuff or have you re-edit some of my stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
I like one more question on the subject of plotting. I've sort of answered this, but I just want to sort of dig a little bit deeper. I've written novels, both pantsing and plotting, and I know that things tend to go a lot faster and tend to be a lot, more terse if you plot a lot. But I also find every time I write anything that I've outlined extensively, I inevitably get to a point in the story where I come up with a better idea than I had the first time around. And so, like, do you feel you should rigidly keep to avoid, or do you follow the new path?
No, and that's something that I say in the plotting book. That's completely perfect, what you just said. You don't want to kill creativity, and your brain should hop to the more difficult thing. Don Moss says a great thing in his class. He'll have us like do a scenario, and then he'll say, so what should happen here? What's the tension moment? And we'll all be like, blah, blah, or blah, or blah. And he'd be like, okay, when I get to a good one, then I'll take it. And, he's like, so now I want you to write down one. I want you to write your thought down. And then he'll say, now I want you to write down 5 more. Then I want you to write 10 more. Because when you get there, that's the good one. So it's like, or he'll say, there's a famous saying he always says, like, get your character up a tree and then throw rocks at him. And like, one rock after the other, like, and more, and I took my son, who's an animator, to the class with me. And by the end of it, we were sitting in the hotel room on our beds and saying, everything we said that week was like, I want a hot chocolate. And we were like, and more, I will have marshmallows and I will do this. And he's like, and more, Mom, and more. So we were just like joking constantly when we talk now about his storyboards and my books. We're always like, oh, really? Can you just take it one step further? And that's what makes it great. And the plotting clock by no means should be a rigid structure. I talk about that being in the beginning. I talk about it like a clothesline, and you put the wash out, and then you move stuff around, and feel free to move it around. Like, if it's not working, get rid of it. If it's not working there, move it on. But no, sadly, people, when they think plotting, think, oh, I'm going to write everything down, and then I've got to follow it like a roadmap, and then I'm going to be bored because my creativity is going to go out the window. And that is not at all what I want you to do. I refused to plot for 4 years. I was like, this is not for me. Da 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 da. No, no, no. And this very good story coach that I work with, called Lauren Obelwager, was all like, well, just like try a little bit of this, and I was like, no, no. And then finally I gave in, and then I went to the Don Moss thing and I saw what he was doing. And then I came up with this idea, like, well, I want to do it on a circle. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute, put it on clock. And then to me, then it was like, as soon as Don was like saying to the class, okay, no, throw that out now, come up with something better, I was like, we can change it. And he was like, it had better been changing the whole time. It better be getting stronger and better and more stakes higher and more exciting the whole way through, man. Like, I want to be dazzled. And then I was like, okay, now I can do this. So yeah, that's why I use sticky notes, because every day almost, they come off, they go on, they come off, they go on, as I'm writing, as I'm planning. I just plan the basic, so I don't spend a lot of time running my wheels in the dirt and not knowing where I'm going. And then I just did it with a friend. I had this idea for a character, and I was like, their motivation is going to be this, and the reason that they're after this is for this. And then I was like, or it could be this with this, this, and this, or this with this, this, and this. And she's like, okay, seriously, why did you come up with the third one? Clearly it's the best one. Go with the third one, right? But yeah, it should always be a work in progress. And anybody who really is afraid to plot, like, look at it like that. Like, it's a moving entity. Do not think of it as a solid, hard structure. And I can guarantee you it will help you get writing solidly and faster. But
yeah, I would definitely say so. I know that the one time, the worst mistake I ever made in terms of just getting something done quickly and getting something done in a way that was enjoyable, I had a lot of really good ideas for fun scenes, and I wrote all of the scenes. And then I was left with creating the connective tissue, and it was the longest, slowest, 25% of a story I've ever written in my life. So yeah, I definitely feel like the flexibility is where the victory lies. Well, that's it for my questions. So I'm going to hand it off to Jeff for the last few in the session.
Alrighty. My first question I have for you is, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but would you recommend shopping around for an editor who's willing to offer you the best deal, or would you rather bypass those that claim they can edit and save up to let the professionals do it? Because I've been approached by people that say, oh yeah, I can edit it for you. And I'm like, okay, well, they've got some experience, but obviously you want to try and save a buck, but then again, you want to have to present the best manuscript that you possibly can too.
Exactly. It's really hard. I honestly fell into a bit of a hole there too, because, finances are not like streaming in like a big, huge river of rapids of money at points for writers. And so I was looking at, okay, well, maybe I can come back in this area. And then I worked with some people, and they just weren't a fit for me. There's nothing wrong with what they're doing. It just wasn't a fit for me. And I realized, okay, so maybe this person would be better if I used them as a proofreader in the end, because they were missing things that I feel are very important. So then I was like, okay, if you're going to pay them that for a proofreader, then you got to buck up and pay this for copy editor. I would say within your means, you get the best you can possibly do, because I mean, if you can go out and get those people who charge $2,000 and really do a great job, great. But I know that a lot of people can't. I work with a couple of really great people like that. And I save them for like really, 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 intensely long, heavy manuscripts, because I can't afford them for smaller manuscripts. I would love to, but I can't. The reality is at this point in my career, I can't. So I get that. And I would say, whatever point you are in your career, try to find somebody who's qualified and, pay what you can.
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know how to address that any other way,
yeah.
right?
I mean, regardless of how well they do it, you definitely need another set of eyes looking at it that do not know
Absolutely.
you, because you want an unbiased opinion. Because there's too many. If you try to give it to like someone like your friend or your family, cousin, whatever, that says, "Oh, I can look at it for you," well, they're not going to want to hurt your feelings. They're going to say, "Okay, yeah, it's not bad. I found a couple typos. Here you go. Have a good day." You're like, that's
Mhm.
not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that's going to rip it apart if they find an area that's going to rip it apart. Okay,
Right.
my final question for you, because you've already answered my third question there, is kind of a hypothetical situation. If you're standing in a coffee shop and someone comes up to you since they've recognized you as an author, and of course they say they're ready to release their first title, self-edited, of course, what one piece of advice would you give that person?
I
No?
would, yeah. How do you say that? It's so funny because I was just in Las Vegas. My husband won a trip and we were gone for 5 days. And people always ask me what you do, and this is what I do. So I say it, and inevitably everyone says, "Oh, I've always wanted to write a teen book or a children's book," right? And so it's kind of like, they don't get how much work goes into it. But I don't know what I would say. I guess I would just tell people to go for their dreams. But I think I would always tell them that they need professional editing. Like, I know people who just needed to get their story out there for their own personal reasons. And as long as it was edited well and they were happy and it released and their families and friends read it and they were happy with that success, then that's a success. Like, it depends on what you're after. But if you're I would say if you're only in this because you think you've heard all these stories that indie authors make all kinds of money and do it really quick, you're not in it for the right reason. If you don't have passion in your stories, if you don't have heart in your stories, your readers are going to know it. They can smell it. And you might make money right away for a bit, but I'm in it for the long game. I don't know. You guys are in it for the long game too, I know.
I can tell you how not to answer that question, because it happened to me sort of like that when I was in a restaurant and whatnot. Like, "Oh yeah, I recognize you, from your their books there and from the podcast there. So I'm getting ready to release a book. What would you recommend I do?" I'm like, okay, well, I would recommend, yeah, you definitely want someone that doesn't know you to look at your work and go ahead and and find someone else. And I would recommend, and contact the indie author, because a lot of times us authors are willing to help out someone else. And he looked at me and I went, crap, I just that's gonna bite me in the butt right there. He's like, "Do you think you could do it?" I'm like, well, we'll see here. Here's my email address. Let me know, and I'll see if I can pencil some time in there. So
Oh, that was good of you.
yeah, but when you get to the book there and you're reading it, you're like, wow, this dude is not ready to be published. But how much of a critique does he want? But I decided to be honest, and he actually said it was very helpful. So
Yeah.
that's all you can
I
do.
think honesty is important, and you directing them toward like some courses like that Story Masters thing that I took. It's one weekend. It's not very expensive. It's actually coming to Toronto, if there's Canadian listeners out there, in May, and it's worth every penny. It's amazing. Those three guys are amazing. So it's one weekend, which you can do off work, and you'll get a lot out of it. So,
Very
that
cool.
kind of thing.
Very cool. All right. Well, that wraps up my questions there. Let me pass you back over to Lindsay. We can wrap this up for you.
All right, I'm kind of jealous. Nobody's recognized me at a restaurant yet. So
No, me either.
sometimes when you have to give them your name with your credit card or something. I'm like, come on, you heard
It's
me?
not all
Like,
it's
you
cracked
look
up
like
to
a
be, let me
sci-fi
tell
dude.
you.
All right, well, let me just ask a question we had from Victor, who is watching live. Thank you, Victor. This was back when we were talking about the editing tips. He says he hates writing dialogue. How do you approach it without using he said, she said?
One thing that I do is I write no he said, she says first. I let it spin in my head like it's happening in a movie in front of me. And I just download it. I will just literally sit and download the characters saying it and just put each sentence in a new line. And then later, I'll read it over, and if it sounds really authentic, it'll sound more authentic that way. But if it sounds really authentic and I know who's talking, I leave out the he said, she said. If I suddenly, like if you leave it for a day, this is a very interesting experiment. Do that, leave it for a day, come back to it. If you read it over and you don't know who's talking, you need a he said, she said there. Or a movement, better, a movement. Like so-and-so scratched the side of his nose, or so-and-so bent their head and looked at their feet and back up again and then spoke. If you insert those just in those small spaces, then read it again. If you leave it another day, come back 24 hours, read it again, and you know everybody who's talking and you're happy with it, there it is. So.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, I agree that you probably need a lot fewer of them than you think you do. And it's always interesting hearing your own books narrated for an audiobook, because
Oh, yeah.
sometimes you'll hear what you didn't realize you were doing when you were writing.
That's another super good thing. If you have I have one of these, and talk it into this and then play it back, and you will hear everything, because it also doesn't sound like your voice, right? You hear yourself differently. So it sounds like someone else reading it, and then you'll hear every glaring thing that sounds like it could go.
Another way to do that is read it out loud to your significant other. That is the best way, because the looks they give you, like, what did you just say? You're like, oh, wait a minute. Let me just fix that right now. Let's try that again. So, yeah, nothing will make you sit back and look at your work a little more better, a little nice, a little more better, a lot better than when you actually have to explain to your significant other that, okay, yeah, I was writing a little bit fast there. Let me fix that, because you pick up everything.
Yeah, my husband reads everything the first time over, and I just get the biggest kick out of listening to him. He'll be in the corner and be like, no way, like, seriously, that's the stupidest thing. That's just stupid. That's stupid. And I'll be like, but at first I would like almost be crying. And now I'm just used to his little rail sessions over there, and he'll go through the whole manuscript. But some of the things he gets so mad about are just comical to me. But it's good though, because he's caught a lot of stuff that is really stupid.
My wife and I have had full-blown arguments in restaurants before, where we're pulling out salt, because I'm trying to like describe the layout of a town. She's like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Look, she's pulling out salt shakers, everything there. This is here, and the waitress walks by and look like, are you ready? Like, no, you better give us a few minutes here. But
she must be very analytical. Is she very analytical? Because my
highly so. Yes.
Yeah, mine is too. And he's all like logical on me, and I'm like, this is a fantasy,
Yep.
Anyway.
All right. See, Joe, this is what we miss out on because we're not married people, but maybe someday we can join in. But no, we've been talking for a long time, so we better let you go. Thanks so much for coming on, Jacqueline. It's been a lot of great information, everything from the Amazon imprints to the editing and plotting tips. We really appreciate it, and I hope the listeners enjoyed it too. Before we let you go, why don't you tell us, are you working on anything new we should check out, and where can people find you online?
Yeah, I have, okay, so it's JacquelineGarlick.com is my website, and everything's pretty much there. I've been working on, I've delved into some romance recently, some adult romance, and so I'm going to be coming out with some contemporary sweet romance series, and it's based on a trip that we took out to PEI, Prince Edward Island, in this very small town I came across with the longest covered bridge in all of North America still standing, and that's all they have there. So I kind of built it about this little town that everybody gets excited because the tour bus shows up, and it was the most comical thing to me and my son when we were there. So I was like, there's a book in this. So created a series around that, and that's going to be coming out soon. And I have some other romance coming out. I also have some plans for some sci-fi, and I also writing under a pen name. I'm trying something out, but I'm keeping that quiet. So we'll see how that goes.
All right, cool. Well, we will put the links to your website and Lumiere. Did I say it right?
Yeah. Yes.
Lumiere. Oh, you're from Canada. You know how to say those French
Lumiere
sounding things.
Soleil. So Leia's
So
also in that.
I'll put the link to that in case people want to check it out right now. I think it's only 99 cents. I'm not sure how that Amazon, how long that will be going on.
Until the end of tonight.
Oh, so those of you
So hurry
downloading
right now.
right now, you can go get it. But it's in Kindle Unlimited too, I saw, so people can grab it there. And I will also put the links to the editing and plotting books so people can check those out. It'll be episode 115. What's our show called? SFFMP 115 at marketingsff.com. I think it's been a long night. I think it's time for me to go to bed. Thanks for listening, everyone.
All right. Thanks for all the info. Nice to meet you, Jacqueline.
Thank
So long,
you.
everybody.
You too.
Bye-bye.